Hello, I just heard about the Rugrats reboot, so I feel obligated to talk about it. And this is going to be very loose, very impressions-y. All I have seen in terms of footage is that first look thing that they released the other day. It's not even a trailer, really. It's just a snippet of a scene. But if you're not familiar, somehow this is a reboot that's going to be streaming exclusive to Paramount Plus, which is technically a rebrand of CBS All Access. Technically, CBS All Access is included as a part of Paramount Plus. It's the same big giant company, Viacom, who owns all this stuff. And as we already know from seeing the recent streaming wars, every big media giant, every media mogul, they want to establish their own corner of the streaming market, if not become the dominant streaming service out there today. This show is set to release, I think, this spring is what they said. Here's the thing. I really couldn't find a great deal of information about this series, and even on IMDb, there is technically a listing for the new Rugrats, which apparently is just called Rugrats, which I hate when a reboot just gets the same name as the original thing, and that's it. Okay, so we need to get into some of the details, and so it's supposed to release relatively soon, along with the reboot of Frasier, but this one in particular, in terms of motivations within the streaming war and Paramount Plus's role within that space, this seems like a really obvious ploy, not only to attract kids who are, of the age to watch a Rugrats show to begin with, but especially millennials, Gen Z people who might have grown up with the original run of Rugrats, because when it comes to especially CBS All Access or CBS as a brand, they really don't tend to appeal to younger people. It tends to be a lot of like crime procedural shows and boring network stuff and some news. None of their properties seem, at least on the surface, to really appeal to younger audiences, but that is a huge demographic for any streaming service that they need to have locked down, is people around my age probably don't have a TV plan whatsoever. You watch everything streaming online, either through a computer or a smart TV or whatever. It's much less likely that older demographics are going to say, oh cool, a new streaming service, let me check that out. It still happens, but definitely not on the same scale as people around my age in their 20s, early 30s, that kind of thing. And younger as well. Teenagers definitely are much more along those lines too. So this seems like a really, really obvious ploy to get some of that market interested in Paramount Plus, or at least to make them aware that it's even there. I guess Paramount Plus would technically have rights to a lot of the Nickelodeon properties, right? Because they definitely have SpongeBob. They're doing a SpongeBob spinoff, which I only found out about today, which is also going to be CG. And yeah, I mean, we're not surprised at this point by reboots and remakes of just properties that have any amount of cultural relevance or recognition. But I guess it's time to move along to the clip itself and to talk about what this new show looks like and to give some of my thoughts about it. So one of the most, I guess we could say, controversial or divisive aspects of this first look clip is the art style. So first of all, it's CG. Now, in general, like, no matter what the CG looked like and what the art direction looked like for this show, I'm sure there would always be people who are upset just that it's CG at all. Just the fact that they're doing CG and not 2D animation would bother plenty of people. I could see that happening. There's a significant amount of resistance to CG in general, at least from people who tend to prefer 2D animation. But yeah, my thoughts on the subject are generally that a media product is never completely defined by the medium itself. It's not that 2D animation is always good, it's not that CG is always bad, and vice versa. It's just not the case. There's so many other elements at play that are much, much, much more important to giving an appealing visual result. That said, I am not at all on board with the art direction for this new Rugrats show. And like I said, I mean, this is already, other people have already gotten into this a bit, at least on Twitter. People are arguing about like, oh, you know what, I don't think it looks that great. Oh, I think it looks a little bit cheap. Or no, it looks fine. It's kind of neat that the lighting's different. Personally, I think it's kind of ugly, and it wasn't okay, so the character models are one thing. They're not too far off from the originals, although it's always going to look a little bit unnerving just because they are 3D models and therefore they interact with the lighting differently, so they have a lot more depth. They're never going to look quite like the original character models. However, it was the lighting and the textures in this scene specifically that really threw me off. I mean, part of that, of course, is the nostalgia thing and comparing it directly in my mind to the original show. That's one thing. I grew up with Rugrats. I liked the show quite a bit. I still like it a decent amount, not enough to rewatch because the episodes aren't especially deep or compelling beyond the surface level story. So part of it is that direct comparison, but the other part I think is just a more removed objective reaction to that art style and the lighting specifically, because in this scene, I don't know why this choice was made, but it looks like it's midday, maybe mid-afternoon in the scene. Apparently a lot of the lights in the house are turned off, so you just have the light coming from the TV and then maybe from other rooms here and there, and then you see the shimmer on one of the walls, and it's like a kind of a stucco texture or something like that. But there's something about that mood and everything that just felt kind of gross. For one thing, it looks a little bit too realistic for the world of Rugrats to me. But then there's just the feeling of why capture this specific mood of hanging out on the floor in the house in the middle of the day when the lights were off. For some reason that conjured just like feelings of I was not on board. The character models and how they move and everything, I mean, I can only speak to a little bit. Something about the movement did feel a little cheap. It's a CG animated show. Like, it's always going to feel cheap to a certain degree. It's expensive and time consuming to do any kind of animation, regardless of the style. It's fine. It doesn't have to blow me away with incredible, realistic movements or anything, or even over stylized cartoony movement. I'm not expecting that from this, but still, I don't know. There was something kind of stiff about it. They would move and then stay in that exact spot for a little too long for it to feel professional. That's very mean, but you get the idea. And another thing about the lighting, I mean, I was kind of impressed with the lighting on a technical level, but here, again, comparing it to the original, something I really love about especially the interior scenes from the original Rugrats cartoon is that everything is really bright and colorful. You have really bold colors, but in general everything's really bright and evenly lit, which that makes sense for 2D animation and especially a kids show. And I have no idea why they wouldn't do that here. Again, like just specifically in terms of the lighting, I don't understand that decision. If somebody can give me a theory as to why that might be, I would be happy to hear it. But I personally did not understand that decision because it just made everything feel a little bit gross and a little bit too real, and that's not what I want from Rugrats at all. I don't understand why that would be appealing to the Rugrats audience at large. So I guess that's all I have to say about the art style. I'm definitely not fully on board. I'm not completely grossed out, especially not by the character models themselves. Another quick comment I had was on the music, because the music definitely seems very faithful to the original score. And as we all know, Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo was heavily involved in the music of Rugrats, and he has since gone on to do a ton of major film scores and all kinds of big entertainment industry work. For some reason, in this case, the music felt too accurate. It felt too faithful to the original. It kind of does the score thing. I think it's called Mickey Mousing, which is where the score exactly follows either speech or character actions. It goes way back to the early days of animation where you didn't have sound effects or Foley, so the music was the Foley. If you needed footstep sound, that would be in the music. And if something crazy happened or a character made a sound, that was done with instruments as opposed to voice recordings or anything like that. And here it just felt out of place to me, maybe just because it feels a little bit old-fashioned. Even if we're just taking it back to the 90s, it feels a little bit old-fashioned. But I get that it has the nostalgia factor too, where just those specific synth sounds and stuff are basically destined to remind people of the original show. The IMDb does say that Klasky Supo is the credited production company and Nickelodeon Animation Studios. So that was my first worry, is that Klasky Supo wasn't going to be involved, because I do like the old Klasky Supo shows quite a bit, not just Rugrats. They also have their studio right here in LA. I used to pass it all the time. But with that said, there's always a certain amount of concern when a studio that is historically known for 2D animation attempts some CG animation. The most recent and relevant example I can think of is Earwig and the Witch, the Studio Ghibli film from Goro Miyazaki. Boy, talk about cheap and bad. If it is Klasky Supo doing the work in the CG here, I don't know, guys. I don't know. In terms of overall like impressions and expectations for the show, I really don't have any lofty expectations for this. And here's the thing, even if they were completely faithful to the original show in every aspect, like if it was going to be 2D and they used the exact same art style and they even animated on paper and it looked kind of grimy and old and nostalgic in that way, and they just used the original music tracks and everything, and it was the full original cast, including the original voice actor for Chucky, whose name I forget, I apologize. I still don't think I would be that into it, just because at the end of the day, it's Rugrats, and while it is creative and cool and inventive and has some interesting storylines, and it really does kind of capture the headspace of being a little kid and going on imaginary adventures and all that stuff, I do think it loses appeal with age. I mean, not the show aging, but the audience aging. At least for me, like, yeah, you still get that nostalgic itch scratched when you look at a clip of the old show or when you just watch the opening theme a couple times, like, but it's not something that I necessarily want to dig into and really go through again and again and again, as compared to something like SpongeBob or certain seasons of The Fairly Odd Parents or some other classic Nickelodeon shows that I do think hold up a lot better for adult audiences in particular. With that in mind, I'm definitely not worried about the show overall. If it's bad and people say we don't like this show, big deal. I don't really get it. I don't, this is inevitable in a way. They had to do this because they own the property. Beyond that, sorry, it's not something I'm going to lose my mind over. And even if it was perfect, I would say, oh, okay, that's kind of neat. Maybe watch it through once and then move on with my life. The rewatch value seems low to me in general for the property. Even if they did a reboot of All Grown Up or like did some more spin-off movies, I don't think it would be for me. It kind of seems like a swing and a miss, and I have a feeling that a number of other people around my age will feel similarly about the show, just a guess. And in terms of little kids who would potentially be exposed to the show for the first time, I feel like they just have a lot of other good options for shows that are catered to them, that are CG, and that are more colorful and fun and immediately accessible as compared to this. And I guess that's all I have. I've talked for probably way too long, but that's it. I mean, more than anything, I would be very interested to hear what other people think about this and what their expectations are for it and whether they're going to check it out or not and whether it's worth signing up to Paramount Plus especially. And that's all. Okay, thanks. Bye.